Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are painting Baby's Breath. It is day 9 of our 30 days of watercolor flowers, and I wanted to show you how to paint this really popular filler because it can be tricky to paint white flowers in general, but I will show you my trick to make it work every time. So when you are starting with a white piece of paper, how do you paint a white flower? Well, white really isn't pure white. It has some color in it. So what you're going to want to do is figure out your base tone. Is it gray? Is it blue? Is it green? A really light wash of that color is what you're going to want to start off with. So mine is a mixture of brown and green, and again, it's really washed out, meaning there's a lot of water and very little pigment. And I'm doing these fluffy circular shapes that remind me of Baby's Breath. Now I'm taking a darker pigment of wash and just barely tapping around on these circles to create a blending effect. Now this will create lighter areas of these little circles and darker areas which look like shadows, and that's what we want. But what happens when the blending is too much and you've lost some of your lightness, which is what has happened in some of these? Dry your brush, grab a piece of paper towel and dry it as good as you can, and with a dry brush go in and tap on your circles, and that will take up some of the water and the pigment. So now what I'm doing is I'm adding more Baby's Breath shapes, circles, little fluffy movements with my brush, and I'm tapping onto the circles I've already created. And what this will do is it will draw out some of that pigment into even more areas. This helps us because now some of the outer fluffy pieces are lighter and we're seeing even more blending. So it creates more realism because there's different tones going on, which is what you would see in a white fluffy flower. So some of those areas are maybe a little too light, some of those newer circles we've created, and so I added a little bit of blue to the blending tone I was using before, and I'm just barely tapping on them so it gives some more curvature. So I'm tapping on maybe the bottom and the top or both sides so you can see the curvature of some of those circles. So now I'm going in with a bright green color and I'm doing really thin strokes with just the tip of my brush to touch down on these flowers. And it's okay that they're a little bit wet still because I want those blending moments. And the reason I want some of those blending moments is when you add greenery around white flowers, the white flowers really start to take shape because you're adding dimension and depth with the greenery being underneath. But then you're also adding these green, almost shadowy tones that make it look like the white is taking some of the color from the greenery underneath and kind of highlighting it there. And so really those bleeding moments are a good thing. They're not going to happen through all of them because some of them have started to dry, but they really help the white flowers have more dimension and start to look fluffier and like Baby's Breath. I'm using a light green wash because once everything has dried, I can always go back in and use a darker tone for contrast, but I don't want the bleeding in the flowers to be super dark. I want it to be this nice light green. So once the bleeding is done and the drying is done, we can go back with a darker green. So now I'm going in with my darker blue-green, and I'm really using this as like a shadowy color. And so underneath the Baby's Breath, I'm adding a little bit. I'm letting the bright green still be the main focus of the green, but just adding a little bit of contrast adds so much depth to your piece. If you look close at Baby's Breath, they also have bright green centers. They're really light and you can't see them on all of them. So my trick is I add a couple of green centers to some of the flowers, and then I take my finger and dab at it, and it just makes this really light, fluffy mark. And so this helps it to not be super stark or noticeable. It just adds a little something to the center of some of the flowers. And I thought I was done, but as I was looking at it, I thought maybe it looked a little too perfect. Baby's Breath is a little bit wild and kind of goes everywhere, and so I did this same technique as before and just added a few more wild branches. Now this also gave the ability to show off more greenery, more stems that were coming off and more branched out, so I really enjoyed how this looked in the end. I think the key with this piece is to make sure that you're not doing too much without blending your tones first. So what I mean by that is you could make too many baby's breath circles and then try to go back in and blend in your grays and your greens, but some of them might have already dried by the time you get there. So just keep that in mind. You can work in sections. You don't have to try to tackle the whole piece at once. And now that we have practiced our baby's breath, we get to add it to our watercolor flower chart. And I'm really glad that we got to explore painting white flowers today, because white flowers, you will encounter them all the time and they can seem really tricky. But if you use those blending techniques that we talked about in this video, they will come out perfect every time. And that is it. Thank you so much for being here for day 9 of our 30 days of watercolor flowers. I really enjoyed painting these white baby breath with you, and I hope that you learned a lot about painting white flowers and that you enjoyed this as well. I will see you guys tomorrow for day 10. Bye.